Always trust.
It struck just after midday local time on March the 28th. A magnitude 7.7 earthquake ripped through central Myanmar and was felt as far away as Thailand and southwest China. Inside a government building in Myanmar's capital, Naypyidaw, Talk to Al Jazeera had just concluded an interview, where Myanmar's Deputy Information Minister, General Zaw Min Tun, defended his military government's grip on power. The crew was still packing up when the tremor hit.
Everyone okay?
Moments later, the general returned to check if the team was safe. At that point, no one knew the scale of what had just occurred. The first reports were of buildings shaken to their foundations, power cuts across cities, and terrified people running out into open spaces. Within hours, the destruction was undeniable. Entire villages flattened, hospitals overwhelmed, and more than 3,000 lives lost in a country already reeling from war, displacement, and political turmoil. 4 years since the military seized power in a coup, Myanmar is barely holding together. The generals insist elections will take place in December, while at the same time fighting rebel groups on multiple fronts. The military's already lost control of much of the country. Armed resistance is growing. The Rohingya crisis remains unresolved. Nearly 1 million refugees remain stranded in camps in southern Bangladesh. And despite the collapse of past repatriation efforts, the military insists Rohingya refugees are still welcome to return. In the next half hour, we go back to March the 28th, just before the most powerful earthquake to strike Myanmar since 1912. A one-on-one interview on looming war crimes trials in foreign courts, accusations of Myanmar becoming a global hub for cybercriminal activities and narcotics, and questions on how much control the military government still have as the rebel armies advance. General Zaw Min Tun, Myanmar's Deputy Information Minister, talks to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much for speaking to us today, Vice Minister Zaw. If I could start by asking you about the elections. We heard from Senior General Min Aung Hlaing that they would take place in December. Of course, it's something that many people have been looking at since the military coup of 2021. Does this mean that you now feel that you've achieved your goals?
The main thing I want to say first is that in 2021, the military took over because of the electoral fraud committed by the ruling party, the NLD, in the 2020 election. So our responsibility is that since the military has taken on their state responsibility, the main duty we have to carry out is to hold a multi-party democratic general election again in accordance with the 2008 constitution. So in order to do that, our constitution allows only 2 years. We have to do it within 2 years. After 2 years, we have to create the conditions necessary to hold an election. Our intention was to hold an election after 2 years. However, during that time, acts of violence occurred. There was an instability in different regions. That is why it has been delayed until now. Now to the question you asked, whether it's now the time or target to hold an election, I would say that the basic data needed to hold the election is now complete. Speaking of data, the first thing is that we need to compile voter lists. In order to compile voter lists, we conducted a census in 2024. Through that, we have obtained the number of eligible voters and where they are located. Based on that, we've obtained the means to compile and prepare the voter lists.
You mentioned the question of stability there, and when we spoke to you 2 years ago in 2023, you said that elections were not possible because you didn't control enough of the country. Now you control even less. Some people say as little as 32%. How is it going to be possible for you to conduct these elections?
That's false information. The census was part of the preparation to hold the election. It was a test run. There are 330 townships across the country, including border areas. During the census, we found that in over half of those townships, we were able to operate without needing any special security. So we've already finished preparing the voter list. And we already have a number of townships where it will be possible to hold the election. That's why we're moving forward. On Armed Forces Day, I spoke to the media about 3 key things regarding the election. I would like to say 3 things to hold the election. First, the timing. Second, the format of the election. Third, the electoral system we'll use. The election will be held between the last week of December 2025 and the second week of January 2026. Based on the census data, the first phase of the election will take place in stable areas. In unstable areas, or those needing additional security, it will be held in a second phase. It will all happen within that time frame. That's the timing of the election. Now, about the electoral system, we'll be electing representatives to 3 different legislative bodies. First, the House of Representatives. Second, the House of Nationalities. And third, the regional and state parliaments. For the House of Representatives, each township will elect 1 representative. This will be under a first-past-the-post system. Whoever gets the most votes wins the seat. The House of Nationalities will be elected using a proportional representation system. In regional and state parliaments, each township will elect 2 representatives. Half of those seats will use proportional representation, and the other half will use the first-past-the-post.
Will you allow previous politicians, particularly those who've served with the NLD, participate in this electoral process?
Right now, more than 50 political parties have already registered for the election. All of them will be allowed to take part.
And any role for Aung San Suu Kyi?
Regarding the NLD, I'll be completely transparent. There are already laws in place concerning political party registration. So there are only 2 options. First, existing parties must reapply for registration. Second, new parties can apply to form and register. We gave enough time for all parties to register. But the NLD didn't register during the registration period. Why didn't they register? Most of their MPs elected in 2020 didn't go into hiding. They didn't run into the jungle. As I've said many times, most of them are all still living in Myanmar.
That actually brings me on to another issue, also mentioned by General Min Aung Hlaing. He talked about the ethnic armies, the PDFs. He obviously referred to them as terrorists. That's how your government sees them. I think many in Myanmar see them otherwise. Nonetheless, he did say there was a way back for them if they chose a political process. Are you going to engage those groups in ceasefire talks?
For Myanmar to develop, peace and stability are essential. That's why we're constantly inviting both the EAOs and PDFs to the peace dialogue table. We are also inviting the PDFs to join the talks. As for the NUG, the government's view is that the NUG created and supports the PDFs, which are committing acts of terrorism. So what we're asking from the NUG is simple. If they want to talk with the government, they must officially renounce all violence and terrorist acts. Once they publicly declare that, we're ready to engage in dialogue.
I understand you see the NUG and the PDF as a terrorist organization. Again, I think many people in Myanmar would disagree. Nonetheless, what you're talking about is trying to find a space for peace and stability inside Myanmar. Given that, and given the NUG, as you say, is an organization very closely associated with the PDFs, would you be open to peace talks with the NUG and finding some kind of common ground, particularly as many of its members are former NLD politicians?
Some members who stayed behind in the country tried to register a party. They even went to ask Daw Aung San Suu Kyi for permission.
Well, let's move on from the NLD and the NUG, because they represent one group. But the ethnic armies also are a very significant group now, far more significant than they were before the military coup. You have the Arakan army who have almost full control of Rakhine State, again, a place that I know is dear to your heart. You served there early in your career. The Karen in Karen State, in Kayin State, the Karenni have almost full control. Shan State, I know you've made recent military gains there, but can you go to the ethnic armies and negotiate, especially now you're in a weaker position?
Regarding the ethnic armed groups, many of them were already in existence before 2021. But since 2021, there's been intense fighting with ethnic armed groups, especially in the northeastern Shan State. As a result, the military has lost control of some territories. In that area, we've been holding peace talks with support from China. First, we held talks with the MNDAA. Those talks were successful. Since then, we've continued negotiations with the TNLA in that same region. We're still in talks with them. It hasn't reached a successful conclusion yet. As for the AA, we've received informal messages through intermediaries expressing a willingness to negotiate, but no official talks have taken place yet. We're always keeping the door open for peace, whether it's with the EAOs or any other armed groups. That's one part, but I want to return to the NLD issue briefly. I'm worried the meaning could be misunderstood. I just want to clarify why the NLD didn't register for the election. There were members of the NLD still inside the country. They wanted to register a party. To do that, they even went to Daw Aung San Suu Kyi to ask for permission. From what I understand, she didn't give a clear answer, neither yes or no. After that, they continued trying to register. While they were trying, NLD members who are now aligned with armed groups began threatening them. They were even threatened with death. As a result, they couldn't proceed with registration. We even had to assign security teams to protect them. So that's why the NLD is unable to participate in this election. However, they can still run as independents. That right remains.
You touch on something there, the organizational crimes, and I want to ask you now about accusations that have been made against the military, of which there have been many in the last 4 years since the military coup. But to look particularly at one, Paziji in Sagang, I think it was in April 2023, it was reported that a local community office was opening. It was attacked very early in the morning, just after 7 a.m. by Yak fighters. Later, Mi-15 gunship helicopters came in. When they finished, they left 157 people dead. You are being accused of war crimes, not only in the ICC, but also cases have been launched in Indonesia, in the Philippines. I understand one is pending in Turkey as well. Does it concern you that the senior military leadership are facing that kind of international condemnation?
First, I want to ask Al Jazeera, how many people have died in Gaza due to Israel's military operations?
We have no question that tens of thousands of people have died in Gaza. You have no control over Gaza. You have absolute control over Myanmar's military.
Yes, the situation in Gaza is because of Israeli attacks, but what's happening in Myanmar is different. Here, the PDFs have killed over 10,000 innocent civilians. These PDFs live among civilians. They wear civilian clothes and attack military forces. Then, when the military responds, they claim civilians are being killed. They attack the military, and when they succeed, they claim responsibility as PDFs. Whether it's the ICC or anyone else, our government is focused on maintaining peace and protecting the safety of our people.
In the case of Paziji, we reported on it immediately afterwards. We saw the bodies. Maybe there were some PDF in the village, but a vast number of those who died were children. We saw their bodies burned and ripped to pieces. Is that acceptable?
Regarding children being present, they were part of groups working with terrorists. So yes, attacks happen. And in attacks, collateral damage is unavoidable. This is the reality of war. Collateral damage happens. To be clear, if you don't support terrorists, if you don't support violence, then there's no reason for fighting in these areas.
But there is increasing international condemnation. There are these lawsuits that are being filed in Asian countries, in ASEAN nations, now in Turkey. There are cases pending at the ICC. And we've seen Rodrigo Duterte, former president of the Philippines, being deported from his home country. I know at the moment you feel very secure here in Myanmar, but does it concern you that there is an international movement to hold you and the military junta accountable for these crimes?
No, not at all. There's absolutely nothing to worry about.
Let's move on to something which, again, I think affects many people inside Myanmar, something that many people have talked to me about since I've been here, and that is the high cost of living. You've lost control of your borders. Getting imports in from other countries is incredibly expensive. Inflation within the country is very high. There's very little growth. Is there anything your government can do to stop that rate of inflation and try and get some kind of growth back into Myanmar's economy?
Yes, we admit it. Prices have gone up. That's true. We also need to understand why this is happening. When it comes to the economy, our first priority is making sure everyone has enough food to eat. That's why, as a government, our first action was to ensure food security and access to essential supplies. Myanmar mainly exports raw goods. We're not a developed country. Since the past, this country has never been able to export industrial goods or manufactured products to other countries. We only have two main export sectors: agriculture, like rice, beans and sesame, and natural resources. Under the military government, we've only exported natural resources that were already extracted. We haven't started new extraction projects. Our focus is on exporting agricultural products, but sanctions are our biggest challenge. European countries are actively discouraging imports of our rice and crops. Major countries are also blocking our bean and sesame exports. We're also facing financial sanctions, so we can only export to neighbouring countries. That means China, India and Thailand. That's it. So yes, our economic progress is limited. We admit that.
Myanmar is now the largest exporter of methamphetamine in the world. It's once again the largest exporter of heroin in the world. And it's also now home to these scam centers on its border areas. Again, areas which I know are not in your control, but this has sprung up since the military coup. These are criminal centers. The UN said some of the largest criminal centers in the world. Is it a concern to you that since the military coup, Myanmar has effectively become a cesspool of crime and drugs?
First, about drugs. The military has been fighting narcotics since long ago. Who's producing the drugs? It's mainly the EAOs. It's well known that amphetamines and ice are being produced in Myanmar, but these require chemical precursors, and Myanmar doesn't produce those chemical precursors. So where are those chemicals coming from? Which countries are supplying them? Next, about online fraud and gambling, where are these operations based? They're mostly based in EAO-controlled areas, places where our government has no control. Who's running them? Who's supporting these online gambling hubs? As far as I know, not a single Burmese national is behind them. The money from drugs and online fraud is used to buy weapons and establish armed groups. And those same bad actors are now protecting those groups. This doesn't mean the government denies responsibility. As the state, we are responsible, because we are the government and we must act. In areas within our reach, we're cooperating with neighbouring countries and taking action. In other areas, we've launched operations to expose and dismantle these activities. This is more complicated than people think. It didn't just start now. This problem has been developing over the past 5 to 10 years. That's why only a 3-country effort, Myanmar, Thailand and China, can bring this to an end.
Let's move on to another issue. One of the big issues facing the Rohingya community is the trouble in Rakhine State. They have been targeted by both military forces and the Arakan army. Tens of thousands more have fled across the border. There are 1 million living in camps in Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, and they are now facing incredible hardships as funding for those camps is being cut. Is there a possibility that they can come back to Myanmar?
We've never said we won't accept them. We've only said we'll accept them under proper procedures. We even created a repatriation plan. The military did not specifically target them. If you're interested, we've welcomed Bengalis who fled fighting in Butidong and Muangdo. They're now in Yangon, and you can meet them. I can help arrange that so you can see the truth for yourself. Again, we never said we wouldn't accept Bengalis. We will accept them.
You're still using the term Bengali, a term which suggests that you still don't believe these people are Myanmar citizens. Do you believe that the Rohingya are really from Myanmar?
Bengali simply means people from Bengal. There's nothing unusual about it. Just like we call people from Kashin State, Kashin, or people from Kaya, Kaya, or people from Dawei, Daweta. It's the same idea.
You know the history far better than I. I know you know Rakhine State very well. But the bigger problem, though, is that they don't trust you. We talked last time about the process. You said it was ongoing. You hoped that they would be able to come back. Some did, and they just didn't trust the terms which you were offering to resettle them. Has that changed?
The lack of trust doesn't come from them. It's the UN and UNHCR who are playing games here. There are people who want to return to Myanmar. Some have even snuck back in, and we've accepted them. The problem isn't with the Bengalis. It's the UN and the UNHCR who are the real obstacle. They are the ones most afraid of the return process.
The problem is, though, I mean, you're right, it is a UN problem, but the UN is just managing the camps. Their funding is principally coming from the United States, and the United States has just cut that. These people are desperate now. Can they come home?
We've always discussed these challenges with Bangladesh. Even before the recent problems began, Myanmar's Deputy Foreign Minister and Bangladesh's Foreign Minister regularly met in Kunming, China, to talk about repatriation and support for returns. The conflict interrupted these discussions. From what we've heard, the US resumed some support for the refugees in Bangladesh just recently. Still, our position is the same. Once we verify the lists with Bangladesh, we're ready to accept them. One more thing I want to go back to, what I said earlier about the UN and UNHCR. The UN Secretary General visited the camps recently, but then made false accusations against Myanmar. We've already explained our position to the international community and to Bangladesh. We've even coordinated with China on this. So when the UN continues to make baseless accusations, it's disappointing. We strongly reject those claims. I'm simply making a comparison with global affairs. The UN Secretary General won't even speak up about Ukraine or Russia. As the UN Secretary General, he hasn't dared to say anything about that issue. So when he steps into an issue when we already have an agreement with Bangladesh, it's no longer about humanitarianism, it's politics.
But one of the reasons you're facing accusations is because there are very well documented cases of atrocities by SAC troops on the ground in Rakhine State. I mentioned the village of Ponyolek, which is close to Butidang. I think it was on the 25th of January 2024. There had been clashes with the AA in the area. The AA had left. SAC troops went in with rockets first and then troops on the ground. By the time they'd finished, 18 people were dead in that village. There are well-documented cases of atrocities, cases which international NGOs are planning to hold your government responsible for. Is it a surprise that the Rohingya are still scared to go home?
There's no reason they can't come back. There were incidents involving the AA in 2024. Even in the incidents involving the AA, if you look at the actual situation, there were also people who fled into Bangladesh. The AA even dropped bombs and used drones to attack those fleeing, just to prevent them from crossing into Bangladesh. The full story of those attacks is something the Bengalis in Buthadong and Mungdor know, and they have links to the OIC. If you ask the OIC, they can give you even more detail than we can.
You raise an interesting question there about the camps in Bangladesh. This is a wider question about the world and the way the world is changing at the moment. We see a new administration in Washington, D.C. Again, I know your administration has very close alliances with Beijing, with Moscow, but there is a reflection here in Myanmar, a very immediate one. We've seen the WFP announce in the last week that they are cutting crucial food aid to 1 million people inside Myanmar because of cuts in funding from the State Department and USAID. Are you concerned that you might get caught up, that Myanmar might get caught up in this new world order that Donald Trump is creating?
Myanmar wants friendly relations with all countries and international organizations. The US has announced plans to deport certain people back to Myanmar. We didn't object. We accepted their decision and responded positively. 4 people were deported in a group. More will arrive in groups later, and we will accept them when they do. I just want to say that we're cooperating closely. The United States has a chargé d'affaires stationed here, and we're in regular contact with them, as well as with officials from Myanmar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There are other communication channels as well. Myanmar's foreign policy is to treat all nations as friends. Second, we prioritize relationships with our neighbors. Third, we aim to strengthen ties with countries we've had long-standing friendships with. That's the direction of our current foreign policy.
But you have a very close relationship with Russia. Donald Trump is currently reappraising his relationship with Russia. You have had a very acrimonious relationship with the United States in the past. Do you think there's an opportunity for Myanmar here to forge a new relationship with the United States?
We don't have any special plan to improve relations with the US, but we're open to maintaining friendly relations with any country. So far, there hasn't been any effort on our part to actively improve the relationship.
Deputy Minister Zorminton, thank you very much for speaking to us. Thank you.